We're inside one such Soviet-era bomb shelter. Hello and welcome to Gravitas Ukraine Direct. I'm Palki Sharma Upadhyay, reporting live from Kyiv, a city waiting for the storm. We landed here on Friday to an atmosphere of fatalistic calm. 5 days on, things are changing, and they're changing rapidly. The mood appears to be more grim. The American president has issued a statement. He says all US citizens who are not diplomats would be wise to leave Ukraine at the earliest. A warning that was long overdue, some would say. 186 miles from where I'm standing, Russia's military buildup is gaining strength. There are more troops, more missile systems, and more ultimatums. The situation is floating between diplomacy and war. 2 high-level talks have concluded, but they've not achieved anything to dial down tensions. All of these developments are being followed by the people of Ukraine, of course, very closely. They've certainly not produced a sense of panic here among the people, because years of living in a state of uncertainty has left them hardened. They're going about their daily lives. The question is, what will they do if war does indeed break out? Where will they seek cover? Well, there's an entire network of bunkers on the city's map. Bomb shelters that were abandoned decades ago, they're now being refurbished. Will these shelters survive modern warfare? We decided to find out. Earlier today, I visited a bomb shelter in central Kyiv. This is what I saw. This is Ukraine, the site of Europe's biggest military buildup since the Second World War. The country is surrounded by Russian troops, both on land and in the Black Sea. The Americans say Russia has completed 70% troop deployment for a full-scale invasion. A former defense minister of Ukraine says Russia has enough troops in place to take Kyiv. The capital of Ukraine is within striking distance of Russian soldiers stationed in Belarus. Su-35 fighter jets, S-400 missile defense systems, and thousands of Russian troops are on standby here, ready to strike when Moscow orders and hit the Ukrainian capital within minutes. How will Kyiv defend itself from Russian bombs? By preparing bomb shelters. Not 1 or 2, but thousands of them. We are in downtown Kyiv, and this is a city of bomb shelters. A lot of these are Soviet-era relics from the time when Soviet and American nuclear weapons were trained at each other. A lot of these bomb shelters were built. Many of them have been upgraded. In fact, only last month, the Kyiv City Council issued an interactive map that shows how many shelters there are, and it guides the citizens of Kyiv to the nearest bomb shelter in the event of an invasion. Let me show it to you on the map. This is what it looks like. This is the city of Kyiv, and all these colorful dots that you see, these are bomb shelters with the varying degrees of preparedness and various levels of facilities that they offer. Let's zoom in. More than 500 of them spread across the city. This is how well the city of Kyiv is prepared. We set out to inspect one such bomb shelter. This is 83 Mezeriska Street. The Kyiv City Council is sprucing up a bomb shelter here from the 1950s. This is now critical security infrastructure for the government of Ukraine. The official in charge takes us down a flight of stairs. A door similar to the kind you'll find on submarines greets us. Behind it lies the bunker, a bit like a cave with machines. The ceiling is low, it's dank and musty, but stocked with everything you would need in an emergency. Batteries for power, running water, telephones and sewage lines, chairs, beds, bathrooms. Inside one of the chambers is a massive piece of equipment, ready to pump oxygen if needed. In the event of an attack, as you can see, there are these pipes, and this is equipped with the oxygen supply, and this is one such supply chamber. If you go in, you see the pipes. This is well built, and they switch on these knobs here for oxygen to be supplied for the people who are inside this shelter in the event of a nuclear attack. Why does this bunker need oxygen? The answer lies on the walls. There are instructions everywhere, a survival guide for war. These bunkers are designed to protect against bombs of all kinds, biological, chemical, and nuclear weapons. There are a lot of posters on the walls. These are all from the 80s. This one shows what needs to be done in the event of a nuclear attack. You see clear diagrams. This is written in Russian, but it gives a detailed description of what are the steps to be followed in the event of a nuclear attack. And there are lots of such informative posters on the walls here. In the event of a chemical or a nuclear attack, they have a special stockpile of gear here, and they gave us access to one such box. Let me show you what it has. Here you go. It has these special masks. I've got one of them out, and this has gas supply, I believe. I'll try and wear it and show you how this works.
Yes.
And this is how it's going to look. I'm not going to keep it on for very long because it's very uncomfortable. But I'll just show you how it works. So I wear this mask, and then I have this device which is supposed to help me figure out how much radiation there is. So one person from this bomb shelter goes up wearing this mask, and you go up and you switch this thing on, and this is going to detect the radiation or chemical levels in the atmosphere to determine how safe it is for others to step out. These shelters will be key to Kyiv's survival in the event of an attack. The government has posted an interactive map online with 5,000 official locations where residents can hide. More than 500 of these are from the Cold War era with built-in facilities where you can survive for days on end. The remaining 4,500 shelters include basements, underground parking lots and passageways, also Kyiv's 47 metro stations. In case of an attack, an alarm will be sounded across the city. Sound signals like sirens and beeps will be transmitted, a message would be played out with instructions, and that's the time when Ukrainians must head to the bomb shelters. This one can house at least 150 people, we are told.
This bomb shelter was built in the 1950s, and it can accommodate at least 150 people.
This shelter, we are told, was built in the 1950s, and you see a lot of those old documents here. This is all in Russian or Ukrainian, and it's hard to tell what it says, but we are told that this is all the details that they have, all of these files that you see. Then you have a first aid box. I'm not sure I can open it. It has some very basic medicines, clearly not enough for 150 people, as the caretakers of the shelter say that this place can accommodate. This is old. You have a radio here. It was built in the 1950s, and I want to show you something very interesting that I just came across. Very old phones. The line is dead. This one's not working either, but interesting, relics of the past. And some numbers, I believe these are emergency numbers. So they have everything in place in case of an emergency. I'm not sure what the food supplies are going to look like. You have some basic furniture, mostly chairs, some beds, a few washrooms on that side of the building. Very basic setup, but we're talking about emergencies, of course, and not five-star accommodation. This bunker is not the only one that needs some upgrades. The government has released an assessment. It said 20% of the shelters in Kyiv were not fit for service. Several shelters are occupied by stores, restaurants and salons. A couple of weeks ago, a lawmaker assessed a bomb shelter near her home. It turned out to be a strip club. Authorities in Kyiv are working overtime to close the gap. Last month, they began inspecting and upgrading all bomb shelters. Kyiv's mayor has declared that the city's subway system will be used as a bunker if needed. The government of Ukraine is leaving nothing to chance. Amid dire intelligence warnings that Kyiv could be captured within 48 to 72 hours of an attack, these bomb shelters will be the difference between life and death for the 2.8 million residents of Kyiv. With the WION team, this is Palki Sharma Upadhyay from the world's most tense capital. There's a special buzz around Kyiv today. It's not a war, it's of diplomacy and the hope that it may succeed. Because French President Emmanuel Macron is in town. Emmanuel Macron has placed himself as the peacemaker. On Monday, he was in Moscow. Today, on Tuesday, he's in Kyiv. Macron's job here is quite complicated. A, he's now the senior-most leader in Europe. So he's not just representing France here, he is representing the entire continent of Europe. And B, he's hoping to strike a middle ground. You see, Boris Johnson visited Kyiv as an ally. The Dutch Prime Minister also visited here as an ally. But Emmanuel Macron is visiting as a broker. And that makes his mission much more complicated. The big meeting happened a few hours back. Emmanuel Macron and Volodymyr Zelensky.
The first steps are what Emmanuel Macron mentioned. We have a platform, the Normandy format. We react very positively to the meeting of the political advisors in the coming days. I believe that after this meeting, there can be an opportunity, if there is openness, for a meeting of the leaders. And there, one can demonstrate one's subjectivity and one's openness.
Zelensky would have been closely tracking Macron's visit to Russia. It went as expected. Putin did not offer an inch. Instead, he shifted all the blame to NATO. Let me give you an idea about Vladimir Putin's mindset. At one point during the press conference, the conversation veered to the Minsk agreement. Zelensky's position on the agreement is quite clear. Everyone knows this. He does not like its terms. But here's how Putin responded to that claim.
Что мне один пункт не нравится из этих Минских соглашений. Но нравится, не нравится, терпи, моя красавица. Надо исполнять.
I know that must have sounded confusing. So let me give you the context here. Vladimir Putin's words are actually from a verse. And not just any verse, it's a poem that talks about rape and necrophilia. Hence the wording, like it or not, bear with it, my beauty. That's Vladimir Putin for you. That's what he said. He doesn't care about Ukraine's sovereignty. He's only concerned about his own influence and power. So Macron's mission was always going to be doomed. It was always doomed for failure. All that he got was a delay.
Donc bâtir ensemble.
Building together and in line with our fundamentals, concrete security guarantees for members of the European Union, for countries in the region, Ukraine, Georgia, Belarus and Russia, is precisely the challenge we need to take up. We had a conversation that saw a number of propositions emerge on which I think, between Russia and France, I can say we converged towards.
That statement is going to worry Kyiv. Emmanuel Macron is linking European security to Russian security. If Russia does not feel safe, then Europe will not be safe, is what he's saying. But here's the problem. When will Putin feel safe? He attacked Georgia, he annexed Crimea, and now he's at the gates of Ukraine. So the question is, when will Vladimir Putin actually feel safe? Well, thousands of miles away, two leaders tried to eliminate this question. US President Joe Biden and German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, their agenda was quite simple. If Putin wants to feel safe, he must feel safe on NATO's terms. Biden has already warned of crippling sanctions on Russia, but all eyes were on Olaf Scholz. Would the invisible Chancellor step up? Short answer, he did not. Joe Biden offered to draw a red line for Vladimir Putin. If you invade Ukraine, Nord Stream 2 will be cancelled. That's what he said.
If Russia invades, that means tanks or troops crossing the border of Ukraine again. Then there will be no longer a Nord Stream 2. We will bring an end to it.
It's a potent threat, but again, just one problem. Nord Stream 2 is not America's to cancel. The project belongs to Germany, so if the West wants to leverage this pipeline, Berlin has to be on board. But Olaf Scholz went invisible again.
Will you commit today to turning off and pulling the plug on Nord Stream 2? You didn't mention it, you haven't mentioned it.
As I already said, we are acting together. We are absolutely united, and we will not taking different steps. We will do the same steps, and they will be very, very hard to Russia, and they should understand.
It's far from ideal. Western diplomacy has hit two roadblocks, one in Moscow and second in Washington, D.C. Emmanuel Macron is talking about accommodating Russian interests. Olaf Scholz is reluctant to commit 100%, and all of this while the military buildup continues. American troops are settling into Poland. Their Humvees, their weapons, everything has arrived, and NATO is looking to make it permanent. NATO's Secretary General says the alliance is considering long-term deployments. In other words, more NATO presence in Eastern Europe.
We are considering more longer-term adjustment to our posture, our presence in the eastern part of the alliance. No final decision has been made on that, but there is a process now going on within NATO, also of course in close consultation with our military commanders, to adjust our presence in the eastern part of the alliance.
And this is precisely what Vladimir Putin has been opposing. He wanted NATO to vacate Eastern Europe. Instead, NATO is considering expanding their presence in the region. As for Moscow, their troops are piling into Belarus. The military drills are underway in full swing. Aerial maneuvers, sea drills, ground exercises, neither side is backing down really. NATO jets are flying over the Ionian Sea. Russian nuclear bombers are flying over Belarus. Even the smallest miscalculation could mean war. So right now, open channels of communication are most important. And the man leading the communication is the President of France, Emmanuel Macron. So here's a question. What's in it for him? Why is the French president going the extra mile for Ukraine? Why is he playing the peace broker? Is it only because he's Europe's senior-most leader, or is there more to his story? Presidential elections in France are just 2 months away. Averting a war can help Macron seal the election, also establish himself not just as France's president, but also Europe's de facto leader, and become the flag bearer of Europe's strategic autonomy.
Let's get straight to the question. What's in it for Emmanuel Macron? He is the president of France. He met Russian President Vladimir Putin in Moscow. Then Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky in Kyiv. Macron's trips have been branded as a high-risk mission. Why did he undertake them? US President Joe Biden is issuing sanction threats. Putin is sticking to my way or the highway. Drawing out hard lines has not worked. Neither has reluctance, as shown by the Germans. Enter Emmanuel Macron. The Ukraine-Russia crisis is Macron's chance to display leadership skills and position himself as a statesman. Take a look at the calendar. Presidential elections will take place in France in April. That's 2 months from now. This crisis is Macron's chance to position himself as Europe's top leader. It is a brand-building opportunity, and it's already paying off for him. The French media is reportedly already comparing Macron to their former president, Nicolas Sarkozy. He was the peace broker in the conflict between Russia and Georgia in 2008. 14 years later, Macron is playing the interlocutor. It helps him. What doesn't is a war with Russia. A Russian invasion of Ukraine would hit gas prices. Macron can't afford that. His voters are already angry about lost purchasing power. But if Macron stops the war, he becomes a hero, both at home and abroad. He gets an edge in the upcoming election, and who knows, a Nobel Peace Prize too. But can he deliver? Will Macron be able to stop a war? Highly likely. Macron has got Putin to agree on a compromise. To Moscow, the French president is a quality interlocutor. Putin reportedly told Macron that he wanted a conversation of substance that goes to the heart of the matter. In other words, Macron is someone Putin believes he can do business with. Does this make Macron Europe's de facto leader? The continent's top negotiator? Europe no longer has Angela Merkel in the negotiation room. The former German Chancellor was Putin's closest negotiating partner in Europe. Also, the stipulated force behind the sanctions on Russia. Merkel's carrot-and-stick diplomacy helped Europe tide over crises. Now she's out of office, and Macron has taken the role. He's balancing the new European security order. He's underlining Europe's strategic autonomy, emphasizing that Europe cannot watch from the sidelines, while the US and Russia battle it out. Macron is ensuring that the European Union takes the lead with talks over Ukraine.
Whatever be Macron's intentions, you've got to appreciate his effort for keeping the window of diplomacy open, for sending out the positive signals. But are his efforts yielding any dividends? Also, what about the other stakeholders in this conflict? Where are they taking the narrative? Do they expect the talks to deliver? To discuss all of this and more, I'm joined by our correspondents from 3 capitals across the world. Julia Chapman with us from Moscow, Simon Marks from Washington, D.C. and Ollie Barrett from London. Hello to all of you from Kyiv. Julia, let's start with you. Emmanuel Macron held a 5-hour-long marathon meeting with Vladimir Putin. How does Russia see this meeting? Has Macron been able to shift the situation in favor of diplomacy?
After the 5 hours plus of dialogue that was held between President Macron and President Vladimir Putin, they finally came out and gave a press conference which was very short on detail. President Putin said that Emmanuel Macron raised some ideas that could form the basis of future negotiations. And he did say that Russia was trying to find some sort of compromise that would suit everybody, but there was no deal that had been heralded by the French side ahead of these talks. That said, according to the Financial Times newspaper, some French officials are briefing that there was at least steps towards an agreement on military de-escalation, something that President Macron said he wouldn't leave Moscow without. They mentioned promises not to stage any kind of military action. Certainly that hasn't been confirmed by the Kremlin, which says that all the subjects discussed at yesterday's meetings will have to be fed back to Russia, France's other allies in the European Union, the United States, that it isn't for France to unilaterally make agreements with the Kremlin. But there did seem to be some sort of positive language emerging from these talks.
Simon, Joe Biden says that it would be wise for American citizens to leave Ukraine at the earliest. Tell us about the threat perception in Washington, D.C. Also, did the meeting with Olaf Scholz yield any dividends, given how they were clearly at odds over the future of Nord Stream 2?
As to the wider discussions that took place here yesterday between President Biden and Olaf Scholz, I mean, they claimed that they are absolutely aligned and marching shoulder to shoulder in regard to Ukraine, and vowed that they would back sanctions jointly against Ukraine, that the United States continues to say will be swift and severe if a Russian invasion occurs. But it was absolutely evident at their joint press conference that there is still a tremendous gulf between them over the issue of Nord Stream 2, that gas pipeline that's going to bring natural gas from Russia to Germany and on to the rest of Europe. President Biden darkly hinting that the United States has some kind of a plan, American officials won't detail it, to make sure that Nord Stream 2 is never able to function, to stop the project in its tracks. That came from President Biden yesterday, but Chancellor Scholz was the German leader at the meeting who wouldn't even allow the phrase Nord Stream 2 to fall from his lips. Well, the president really was repeating what the State Department has already advised American citizens in Ukraine to do, and that is to evacuate the country using commercially available methods of transport as quickly as possible. That warning was first issued about 10 days ago, but hearing it articulated by President Biden himself for the first time certainly sends a fresh message, not just to American citizens in Ukraine itself, but also to the wider world, that he remains absolutely focused on the possibility of the crisis being inflamed by a Russian invasion.
Ollie, tell us about the developments in London. The Prime Minister of Britain has said that he will not, quote-unquote, flinch over Ukraine. But what's he up to? Is Britain sending more troops?
Boris Johnson certainly wants to send that message. He says Britain won't flinch in the face of moves by Russia, and he also wants to show to Ukraine that London very much stands behind Kyiv. Of course, Boris Johnson himself was in Kyiv earlier this week. We also know that Liz Truss, the Foreign Secretary, and Ben Wallace, the UK Defence Secretary, are due to travel to Moscow within days to meet their counterparts in Moscow. Boris Johnson continues to reiterate his support for the Ukrainians, for the NATO military alliance, and has been considering a number of moves that relate to the movement of troops and military hardware around Eastern Europe to send that message to Moscow that Britain is not going to, as I say, flinch, which is the word that Boris Johnson has been using himself. The UK also feels it's been showing a great deal of support in practical terms to Ukraine already. It's been sending defensive missiles to Ukraine. It's been training troops there for a number of years now.
Julia Chapman, Simon Marks, Ollie Barrett, thanks very much for those updates. Wars are not just fought by two armies or two peoples. Wars are fought by two economies. And that's why historians talk about war machines. You need guns, missiles, fighter jets, warships. And all of this costs money. Vladimir Putin says that he's ready for anything. He's even talking about Russia's big nuclear arsenal. If war breaks out, Putin will not shy away from firing his nukes. That's what he says.
Of course, NATO's armament potential and Russia's are not comparable, and we understand that. But we also understand that Russia is one of the leading nuclear powers and ahead of many countries in its modernity. There will be no winners.
Those are ominous words from the Russian president. Maybe he does have the appetite for war, but can his economy bankroll it? On paper, the NATO is far ahead. Russia's total GDP is around $1.7 trillion. NATO, more than $18 trillion. Russia never really recovered from the shock of 1991. Their growth rate is less than 2%. Inflation is around 8%. And foreign trade is pinned on one sector, oil and gas. Around 50% of Russia's exports come from this sector, oil and gas. If the West shuts that tap, Russia's foreign trade is going to collapse. The fact is, their economy is struggling. Growth should be the priority for Moscow right now. Fighting a war is out of the question. Having said that, we are not talking about a conventional leader. We are talking about Vladimir Putin. He does not follow the playbook. I can give you an example from 2014. Putin ordered his troops to invade Crimea. Even then, Russia's economy was struggling. It was on the brink of a recession, but Putin invaded anyway. So economy alone may not influence Moscow's choice. I can give you two reasons why. Number one, Putin has calibrated his economy to survive a war. And number two, he's not expecting NATO to join this fight. Russia's central bank reserves stand at $640 billion. That's equal to 17 months of export revenue. If oil gets more expensive, that pile will keep growing. Plus, Putin has taken the Russian economy away from the US dollar. I'll tell you how. In 2013, around 95% of Russia's trade was done in dollars. Today, around 10%. But if Putin has abandoned the dollar, what is he trading in? Well, gold. In 1995, Russia's gold reserves were at $2 billion. Today, $130 billion. The bottom line is this: if you think logically, Russia should not invade Ukraine. It should focus on economic growth. But if Putin does choose to invade, Russia is not going to collapse. Its economy can sustain a short war. If NATO stays out, that's what it will be, a short war. So why is Putin reluctant? Well, he ignored the economy in 2014 and invaded Crimea. So why is he rethinking now? Because annexing Crimea was a popular move. I may get into trouble for saying this standing here in Kyiv, but that's the fact. Both in Russia and Crimea, it was a popular move. Even today, a lot of Crimeans do not regret splitting with Ukraine. I'm not saying Putin's move was legitimate. I'm just saying that it was popular. But invading Ukraine is a different ballgame altogether. The Russian public are slowly emerging from a major pandemic. They will not support an all-out war. Even if it is a short one, they are not going to support it. And unlike Crimea, there is going to be a pushback. Crimeans may or may not be happy under Russia. Ukrainians certainly will not be. They will fight an insurgency. They will bleed the Russian troops. Even Russian commanders know this. US intel reports indicate that Russian generals are wary of a full-blown war with Ukraine. They fear the cost is going to be too high, billions of dollars will be spent, thousands of lives will be lost, and that's not something that the Russian public will voluntarily accept. Like I said, if this were to be a question of logic, the answer was quite clear. Russia will not and cannot invade. But Vladimir Putin, let me repeat, is not your conventional leader. He is not answerable to his electorate. He doesn't have an election anytime soon. So it's really a question of personal appetite. So what does Putin really want? Does he want war? Or a face saver? What kind of concessions is the Russian president looking for? I spoke to two individuals who have been following this affair closely, who have a close understanding of how the Russian president thinks and operates. Romeo Kokriatsky, he's the managing editor at the New Voice of Ukraine, and Svetlana Zalischuk. She's a former foreign policy advisor to Ukraine's prime minister. Here's what they told me earlier today. Romeo, yesterday we saw a meeting between Vladimir Putin and Emmanuel Macron, and then they held a press conference subsequently. Would you call this meeting a success?
It's hard to say exactly what the success of that meeting would look like in the first place. Obviously, the threat of a further Russian invasion has not gone anywhere. Putin was also allowed to continue issuing Kremlin propaganda lines without Macron pushing back, such as the idea that Ukraine is pushing forward a genocide and that Ukraine is planning provocations. Obviously, this is all untrue. But he did manage to say that with Macron standing in the background. So if anything, it maybe counted as a success for Russian propaganda. But Macron was not able to, I think, do anything substantial to really de-escalate the current situation.
What is your assessment of Macron's visit to Moscow and subsequently here in Kyiv? We are waiting for the outcome.
For me, success would be defined as joint efforts of the international community, not just to de-escalate the situation around Ukraine, but also to make sure that Putin doesn't have any leverage over Ukraine, over EU, over transatlantic community to impose its own conditions about global order, right? And yesterday we've heard that there was a conversation about this Finlandization, right, of Ukraine, and I think that this policy is just unacceptable and not realistic. Because if you look at the opinion polls here in Ukraine, majority of Ukrainians support a strategic course to European Union and to NATO, and it's up to any international leader to tell Ukrainians what their choice should be.
We've seen other world leaders visit Kyiv, but they came as allies of Ukraine. Emmanuel Macron has come as a peace broker, and he has linked Russian security to European security. How does Kyiv view his mission?
Macron is part of the Normandy 4 format. So France has played kind of a key role in trying to regulate this conflict that Russia started in our western territories, or in our eastern territories, rather. So I wouldn't call him quite as a peace broker, but as an attempt to represent European interests in this matter.
What specific concessions would you say Vladimir Putin wants from the Europeans and from NATO? I know he has spelled out key demands which have been rejected repeatedly, but what specifically is he asking for when we talk about creating a sort of a security apparatus which is acceptable to both sides?
Well, I think that there are things what he say and there are things that he does, and these are different things, really, right? Because what Putin has said, we has never annexed Crimea, we are not in Donbass, we has never shot MH17, this the airplane that Russians has shot over the Donbass, and so on. They keep on saying that it's not us, right? Same with Georgia in 2008 when they annexed and invaded Georgian territory. So we see a consistent, aggressive policy and aggression of Russia, not just, by the way, against Ukraine or Georgia, its immediate neighbors, but also against many democratic countries. You name it. It's disinformation, propaganda, interference in national elections, right?
Final question, and very quickly I ask this to everyone who's been observing the situation. Do you believe that diplomacy will deliver, or do you see a war, or if not a full-fledged invasion, maybe a short incursion happening?
I think the hope is always that democracy or diplomacy will prevail. In this case, I believe Russia's continuing military buildup. It's not like they simply sent 100,000+ troops and stopped there. They are still continuing to ship both men and material from their far eastern military districts. So in this case, I think it would not be amiss to consider that Putin is looking for a full-scale military confrontation.
Your assessment?
Well, Putin already used its army in 2008, in 2014 against Crimea and Donbass. So a further military invasion is not out of picture for sure. But it's up to us, Ukraine, but also the international community, including India, to make sure that there is no third world war, in the heart of Europe. And we should make everything possible to show that there is a very high price for Putin to move forward with its military aggression.
Romeo and Svetlana, thank you very much for sharing your thoughts with us.
Thank you for having us.
Here in Europe, the continent is staring at what's being called the most dangerous moment, all because Russia is threatening the sovereignty of Ukraine. But some thousands of miles from where I'm standing, another country is brushing aside the threat to its sovereignty. I'm talking about Nepal. It has been caught trying to hide Chinese expansionism. Nepal is hiding. China has encroached into Nepalese land. It is building a road. It is trying to build canals. It is limiting grazing by Nepalese farmers, even restricting pilgrimage. What is Nepal doing about all of this? Hiding these stories.
China is encroaching into Nepal. This is according to a leaked government report. The encroachment is not breaking news. We have known about it since 2020. Palki Sharma was at the helm of Nepal. There were allegations that the Chinese had built some 11 houses on Nepalese territory. WION gave you the inside details. Nepal shares a 1,439-kilometer long border with China. Parts of this border are inaccessible. Curtsy, difficult terrain. So the border is marked by 100 pillars. The Chinese illegal construction is between pillars 11 and 12. This falls in the Humla district. The encroachment was first reported in 2020. It was followed by anti-China protests outside the Chinese embassy in Kathmandu. Local reports also cited a Ministry of Agriculture survey. It talks about illegal Chinese occupation in several border districts. The list includes Dolakha, Gorkha, Darchula, Humla, Sindhupalchok, Sankhuwasaba and Rasuwa. The Ministry of Agriculture denied the existence of any such report. But the protests continued. In September 2021, the Nepalese government dispatched a task force to Humla. Its findings were never made public. While everyone knew that the Chinese had taken Nepali land, there was no official confirmation. That is, until now. The leak report gives that much-needed official validation. The report claims that Chinese security forces are interfering with human activities on the Nepalese side of the border. Beijing has restricted pilgrimage in a place called Lalungjong. So where is this place located? In Nepal. It is close to Mount Kailash, which happens to be a sacred site for both Hindus and Buddhists. The report also says that China has limited grazing by Nepalese farmers. Again, where? On the Nepalese side of the border. China has also been trying to construct a canal on the Nepalese side of the border, plus a road. Can China do all this? Not legally. Illegal construction in another country's land is called encroachment. The question is, why has this report not been published yet? Why has Kathmandu not protested Chinese expansion? When Prime Minister Sher Bahadur Deoba was sitting in opposition, he called out Oli for cozying up to the Chinese, for not doing enough to safeguard Nepalese territory. By brushing this report under the carpet, Deoba is guilty of the same. The leaked report should force policymakers in Nepal to rethink the country's ties with Beijing. Can a country that steals land really be trusted as a partner? The Chinese embassy in Kathmandu denies encroachment. We are not surprised.
In Canada, Justin Trudeau is getting a lesson in democracy. Thousands of truckers have besieged his capital, Ottawa. His police are scrambling to contain the violence. Guess what the Prime Minister is doing? Tweeting from his secret hideout. Justin Trudeau moved out of his official residence last week. He and his family were moved to a quote-unquote undisclosed location. Days later, that location is still undisclosed. Meanwhile, this is what Canada's capital looks like. Hundreds of anti-vax protesters, dozens of trucks. It's a picture of anarchy. Now, just to be clear, we do not support these protesters. They're anti-vaxxers, their agenda is anti-science. What they're demanding could put lives in danger. Our concern is Justin Trudeau's reaction, his handling of this. He's not meeting the protest leaders. He's not reaching out to them. Instead, he's shooting out tweets. The Prime Minister of Canada, here's what Justin Trudeau is saying. Canadians have the right to protest, but let's be clear, they don't have the right to blockade our economy, our democracy, or our fellow citizens' daily lives. In other words, you can protest, but on my terms. That's what he's saying. Unfortunately for Trudeau, that's not how democracy works. Protesters do become unruly sometimes. Demonstrations do turn violent. When that happens, the government steps in. Police officers are deployed to maintain law and order. In fact, the city of Ottawa is doing exactly that. A state of emergency has been declared. Hundreds of cops have been deployed. Canada's plan is to end these protests.
Many of the actions that have taken place over the course of this demonstration have been unlawful and, frankly, disrespectful to the rights and freedoms of all Canadians. It is well past the time to bring this protest to an end. Canada is a peaceful nation, and we often serve as an example of hope to countries around the world.
Strange how times change. When Canada cracks down on protesters, it's an example of peace. When India does it, it's a violation of rights. The fact is, Canada's strategy was flawed. Trudeau never gave talks a chance. He did not offer concessions. He decided to brazen it out. But the Prime Minister made one crucial mistake. He underestimated the protesters. Let me show you what the US-Canada border looks like as we speak. Hundreds of trucks are stuck. And inside these trucks are important materials. We're talking about food, medicines, all kinds of supplies. How long before this traffic jam starts affecting normal life in Canada? So Justin Trudeau's opposition to these protests is understandable. But his response is not. Instead of reaching out, the Prime Minister is alienating the anti-vaxxers even more. He's turning them into anti-vax heroes. What's worse, this movement is spreading. Truckers in New Zealand are taking to the streets now. On Tuesday, they blocked the area around the Parliament of New Zealand. Guess what Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern is doing? The exact same thing that Trudeau did. She has ruled out any kind of talks with the Freedom Convoy. It may seem like the right thing to do in the short run. But by ignoring these anti-vaxxers, these leaders are letting them grow in numbers. Yesterday, it was in Canada. Today, it's in New Zealand. Tomorrow, it could well be the United States of America, and that is going to be a disaster. The US has a large anti-vax population. Add some guns to the mix, and the situation could spiral. We are not saying government should give in to anti-vaxxers. We are saying they should win them over, at least try to, hold talks, show them the science, beat the disinformation with facts. Ignoring the problem will only make matters worse. Until 2 years back, Justin Trudeau also agreed with us. He was batting for talks and concessions. Today he favors a crackdown. We would love to send him a few tips on handling protests, except his address is still undisclosed. And this brings us to the end of tonight's show. We will continue tracking all the developments for you from Kyiv. It's almost 6:30 p.m. local time, and one hopes that night falls on this crisis very soon. I'm Palki Sharma Upadhyay. You're watching Gravitas Ukraine Direct.
with the saints at the rivers, we'll gather at the rivers. Soon our happy hearts will quit.